Okay, Chair, when you're ready, we're now live on YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Good morning and welcome to a virtual Personnel Committee meeting of East Devon District Council on the 27th of January 2022. I'd also like to welcome viewers to our live stream on YouTube. I'm your chair for the meeting, Councillor Ian Thomas. Due to concerns relating to COVID risk, our council has resolved to extend its delegation of much of our decision making to senior officers until the 11th of May 2022 and to continue to hold virtual meetings in the interim. This morning will therefore be on a consultative basis. Where we would normally have decided a matter, we will make recommendation to a senior officer who will take that recommendation into account in taking their decision. However, we'll continue to work as closely as possible to normal procedural rules as detailed in our constitution. The code of conduct will also apply throughout our meeting. We reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. Please turn any telephone devices off or to silent. Thank you. Should our internet connection fail, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. If we are not successful within 15 minutes, we'll consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. If you wish to speak, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. We'll now start the meeting with a roll call of committee members. Can I pass over to you, Debbie, please?
Thank you, Chair. Let's start with you, Councillor Ian Thomas.
Present.
Thank you. I've had apologies from Councillor Ranger, so I'll move on to Councillor Allen. No, Councillor Armstrong, please.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott, please.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Bickley has given her apologies. Councillor Blakey, please.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Cahill, I don't see on the call. Councillor Bristosarum.
Present. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. I've had apologies from Councillor Hall. Councillor Hayward. I don't see Councillor Hayward. Councillor Lawrence, please.
Present, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Loudon.
Present, Debbie. Thanks.
Thank you. I've had apologies from Councillor Hookway, and finally Councillor Pepper is also not on the call. Chair, back to you. I can confirm that you'll call it today.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Firstly, I'd like to thank Councillor Loudon for, as unfortunately Councillor Ranger is unwell this morning, Councillor Loudon is stepping into the breach as Vice Chair for the inevitability that my internet connection fails at some point. Thank you for that, John. First item on the agenda is public speaking. I've got no members of the public registered to speak. Is that still correct, Debbie?
That is the case, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minutes of the previous meeting held on the 30th of November 2021. If anybody is concerned with the minutes, could you please raise your electronic hand? Otherwise, I'll assume you're content to accept these minutes. I see no hands, so on to agenda item 3, apologies. Are there any late apologies, Debbie, please?
No, so just to recap, Chair, we've got apologies from Councillor Ranger, Councillor Bickley, Councillor Hall and Councillor Hookway.
Thank you very much. Item 4, declarations of interest. I think I can probably ask here, but if any members got an interest to declare any of the items on the agenda, could you please raise your electronic hand now? I see no declaration. Oh, hang on, we now have Councillor Loudon. John.
Thank you, Chair. And perhaps Henry might guide me because to avoid me having to try to perhaps say this at every meeting or not. My interest would be personal as an ex-Unison official and receiving a pension from Unison and given their involvement in HR matters. If I don't need to declare it, Henry, then that would be useful to know, and I won't bother people in future. Thank you.
Well, Chair, you've obviously declared for today, but we can have a conversation after the meeting about the onward approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Henry. If, of course, anybody notices a declaration or recognises one at any point in the meeting, if you could raise your electronic hand at that point, we'll ensure it's properly registered. Agenda item 5, matters of urgency. I've not been advised of any matters of urgency this morning. No. Agenda item 6, confidential exempt items. There are no confidential items or exempt items which officers recommend should be dealt with in this way. So we'll go straight on to agenda item 7, which is pay policy statement 2022-23. Joe, can I hand over to you, please?
Thanks, Chair. Just a brief introduction to the paper, which I think is fairly self-explanatory. So under the Localism Act, we are required to annually review our pay policy statement, unless changes happen during the year, in which case we would have to review it more regularly. And obviously we've got the reward review. You know, depending on the outcomes of that, we may need to do further reviews of it later on in the year, but it tends to be an annual review. Part of the terms of reference for Personnel Committee is to undertake that review and then recommend to Council, as you can see in the report. And the Personnel Committee are also asked to review our pay multiple, which is how we compare sort of between our lowest paid employee and our highest paid employee, to ensure that it remains within the ratio that's been agreed for the Council, which is 10:1. And if not, that we report that to full Council. And as you can see from the report, under paragraph, I've lost it. Paragraph 3, sorry, of the report, we are remaining within that 10:1 ratio. So we're currently at 6.6:1. And obviously once, you know, the pay policy statement, if it is agreed, then it will be published on our website in the usual way. We are going to make some slight changes to how it's presented, just to make it a bit more user friendly for public and people, you know, wanting to have a look at it, but it will be, you know, published on our website. So that's it really. Any questions or points that I want to raise?
Thank you very much, Joe, for that. Would anybody like to speak or comment on this report at this point, please? Councillor Loudon, John.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Joe, for this. I'll just say that my lack, as portfolio holder, my lack of comments, perhaps through the meeting, aren't disinterest, but rather satisfaction. So I'd make that point to start with. Just to sense check, Joe, the point that you were referring to a minute ago in para 3 of the report in full section, the ratio that we adopt of 6:1 in terms of the lower and the higher paid roles versus the parameter that we have of 10:1, is that sort of best? Is the 10:1 the sort of best practice sort of market approach? Committee might be interested.
Yeah, but from memory, I don't think there's any sort of published, you know, the government, for example, in their pay policy statement guidance haven't published any particular sort of maximum ratio that we need to be looking at. And I think, you know, we're pretty much in line with others. I'm presuming at some point in the past the council will have had a conversation about the maximum ratio, and, you know, setting that 10:1, but it doesn't seem out of the way from my experience or from what I've seen of other councils. And obviously, as I say, we're below that maximum ratio anyway, and I think we have been for some time, is my understanding.
Thank you for that. Nobody else, no more speakers on this item? No, I'll follow John's lead and then regard the fact that nothing's being said as being basic agreement. The recommendation this morning is that our Personnel Committee recommend to Council the adoption of the Pay Policy Statement 2022-2023. I'll propose that from the Chair. Could you please indicate green ticks in favour, red crosses against? Thank you. This obviously only applies to committee members, although obviously anybody else is welcome to be here this morning. Well, that looks pretty unanimous to me. Would you agree with that, Debbie?
Yes, Chair, the 7 votes for, so that's unanimous with your committee members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 8, which is the reward review update. Surprise, surprise, it's back to Joe again.
Thanks, Chair. So as you can see, this report sets out the initial findings from the work that the consultants have been doing for us following us commissioning them to do this reward review. And they've been specifically looking at our pay and grading structure, and they've also sampled a cross-section of jobs, so both sort of vertically and horizontally across the organisation, around 20% of our roles that they've benchmarked with the wider market. As you can see in the report, they've highlighted that we've got very good governance and controls in place around pay and grading, but they have flagged the concern around the number of market supplements, which we know about, hence having the reward review. In terms of the benchmarking with the market, unfortunately, it's not straightforward. Some roles are in sync with the market and some roles aren't. So although one option for us could be that we just apply a percentage increase across all of our grades and roles, that wouldn't necessarily resolve the problems that we've got in terms of market competitiveness. So what we're proposing, as you can see in the report, is that we do more work, and we're requesting that from committee, that we utilise some of the funds that have been set aside for pay in the new financial year budget to work with the consultants on that work. And that will include the development proposals for how we could sort of have an improved pay and grading structure which would resolve the issues, as well as sort of looking at the pay rates and making sure that we're competitive. And the consultants are currently drawing up some proposals and costings for us, so we can understand exactly the steps involved and the likely costs of that, and then we can build that into our plans in terms of what there may be elements of it, for example, we can do internally, like cost modelling and so on, rather than using consultancy time, for example. But I need to understand that detail before we can come to those decisions. So unfortunately, at this stage, we can't provide any more definitive information, and we're obviously continuing to manage staff expectations around this because it is obviously a sensitive subject. We gave an update in our last week's staff newsletter, and we'll do further updates as we learn more. I'm also continuing to involve Unison in the work that we're doing with PwC, with the consultants. They've been involved with various meetings, helped us to select the roles to be benchmarked and so on. So we will have more detailed proposals certainly by April's Personnel Committee meeting, if not before. We understand the urgency of this and needing to move quickly whilst balancing that with doing a thorough and robust job. And obviously it's all important to note as well that if we do as a council agree any changes to our pay and grading structure and pay rates, that will be subject to collective consultation as a change to terms and conditions. So there'll be a further timescale we need to build in to the work as part of that. So, and finally, you'll see in the report that we're also suggesting or recommending that we don't make any decisions as a council about becoming a real living wage employer at this time, and instead we build that into the next steps of the work with the consultants.
Thank you very much, Joe. Came to a swift halt there. I have Councillor Arnott, who keeps bobbing up and down with his hand. I'm not sure. Do you want to speak at this point, Paul?
No, this is this random affliction I have to. What am I doing? Hands or thumbs up? I have no control over
I
it.
dread to think.
It's thumbs up, is it? Oh, well, I hope Joe takes that as constant praise all the way through, but I honestly, I don't,
I think we might be worth consulting the strata doctor in between.
I have been for quite some time. Thank you, Chair.
No problem at all. I just have one quick question in the absence of any other hands, Joe, and it's more just a confirmation really that obviously we're well advanced in the budget process for 22-23 now, and one of our significant elements of our budgets is based on our remuneration policy or driven by our remuneration policy. I just want to confirm that that Jack, Councillor Rowlands, and Simon as our Davey as our Section 150 officer are actually comfortable with with how we're progressing on this, or whether there's any timing pressure there that would require us to bring that forward.
I mean, it's within, obviously, in the financial implications section of the report. That's what Simon has, provided and fed into the report, and he's been involved in a lot of the meetings that we've had with the consultants. So, to my understanding, it has been built in. And Mark, I don't know whether you want to add anything to that.
Mark, you comment?
Yeah. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Yeah. No. I mean, as you'd expect me to say, hopefully. Myself and Simon, have been liaising very, very closely on this in terms of the preparation of the draft budget. The 300 to 500,000 figure that's in there is a compromise between what I was perhaps suggesting and what Simon was trying to get away with. So yeah, we're fully cognizant of it, and the hope, the sincere hope is that budgetary provision that's been made will be enough to deal with the issue when we get to the stage of a fuller report back from PwC.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the explicit comment, but you'll understand why I wanted to get it into the discussion this morning on the record. Councillor Loudon, John.
Thank you, Chair. I'm undermining what I said earlier on. So 4.4, Joe. The point you made about at this point not making a decision about the real living wage from a personal perspective, as opposed to on behalf of the council, I understand why you say that, and I accept that fully. A personal view is that I hope that all we're doing here is delaying a decision rather than anything else, but that's a personal view, clearly.
Thank you, Councillor Loudon. I don't know whether you want to comment, Joe. I'm conscious you're nodding your head, but it's.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important. We know the council's sort of views on that, so it's important to make sure we build that into the next steps of this work and see if we can afford to do it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Armstrong. Megan.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm probably just repeating what Joe's already said, but it does concern me that we have some really serious, in certain departments, we've got really serious concerns about not being able to appoint because of the levels of salary that we offer and so on. And that's the urgency that I see, obviously, and I'm sure Joe does, and I'm sure the consultants do, and the chief executive does. But I just wanted to confirm that point, that does worry me. And the sooner that this can be done, the better. And hopefully we can get, because the lack of being able to appoint is affecting various services. And I think we just need to be always aware of that. And the sooner it's done, the better. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think my only comment to sort of add to that is, I completely agree. But I think, as we know, and we've talked about before, pay is only one aspect of the work that we need to do, whilst also being mindful of the really challenging climate. I think I was looking at some data the other day. They're saying there's about 1.1 person per vacancy at the moment across the economy. So, it's a really challenging market we're trying to recruit within. And I think the other thing, hearing sort of intel on the ground that other employers, other councils locally are looking at their pay rates as well. So, if we're not careful, we could be in a spiraling sort of situation. So it's just being mindful of all the wider context as well as what in the councils trying to resolve.
Yeah, I'm sorry to over-egg that a bit.
No, you're right. You're right. It's important.
Thank you very much.
I don't think, for what it's worth, Megan, I don't think you're over-egging it, particularly in lines of headline inflation rates and how they're now starting to move up as expected. And of course, that's probably before wage-driven inflation actually has its influence, which can only increase that figure rather than reduce it. So there are some pretty serious discussions to be had. And I think a lot of us who've prepared budgets in stable and low interest rates, low inflation environment over the last decade would be reminded by those of us who were around, including the dog. Thank you very much. By those who were around in the 1980s, And actually remember one afternoon, I think interest rates hitting 22% around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I must admit at which point we shut our business and went home. Anyway, but moving on from that, well, I've got, I think I've got a hand from Councillor Miller. Councillor Miller, good morning. Good afternoon.
Well, thank you, Chen. So sort of not quite, but sorry I'm late. Is this still agenda item 7? I'm sorry to have to ask that.
We're on agenda item 8, I think.
Have we moved on from, are we on the reward review update then?
That's correct.
I've missed my opportunity then, sorry, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Miller,
Fine.
I can't help you with that one.
No, I'll ask the question via email, it's absolutely fine.
Okay,
Cheers.
No problem. I'm quite happy to pick it up outside the meeting, or I'm sure Joe will be similarly with me. Moving on from that, we have then 2 recommendations on agenda item 8. Firstly, that the Personnel Committee agree to further work being undertaken on the reward review, including the development of detailed options and costings, with this additional work funded from some of the monies already allocated to pay within the 22-23 budget. That's the first one. With the second is that no decisions are made at this stage about whether the council should become a real living wage employer, and instead this is included in the next phase of the reward review as outlined above. Again, to move things forward, I'm quite happy to move that from the chair. Could I have all those please in favour and with the green ticks, or against with your red crosses?
That's carried unanimously, Chair.
Thank you very much. And we can now move on to the people data report, which is agenda item 9. And just for a change, this is over to you again, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you recall our last meeting in November, I provided some proposals around the sorts of people data to report regularly to committee, and this report here is the first of those reports. So it's really giving you some sort of key workforce data around things like headcount, turnover, our vacancies, our sickness absence, and so on. And over time, then we can sort of build a picture and a better understanding maybe of what the sort of workforce composition and some of the issues that we're facing, and use that then obviously to inform decisions through the committee. I'm not going to go through the detail, and obviously if anybody's got any questions, but you'll see in the main report, I've just, in paragraph 2, I've just flagged or highlighted some of the key things with regard to the data for this period. And really, if you've got any questions or points that you want to raise with me.
Thank you very much again, Joe. I've got Councillor Desarum. Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Joe. Very positive report. I just wanted to quickly ask you about 2.2 on page 16, when you said high-level benchmarking data suggests that 100 days due to fill a vacancy is common. Do you think that will be decreasing? Is that likely to decrease, or is that sort of going to be the norm, given that the issues that Councillor Thomas touched on earlier? Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. So that's, as I say, I described it as high-level benchmarking because it's really difficult to get external sort of benchmarking data around a period of time to recruit, and certainly nothing within our sector, although I don't know whether that would have any particular impact compared to other sectors. And obviously that period does take into account people's notice periods as well. So, if people are on 3 months' notice, that's obviously a big factor in extending the period of time that it takes. We're not finding particularly any increases in the period of time that it's taking to recruit. We're definitely struggling as an organisation because of wider capacity issues, and the demands on services and managers and so on to recruit quickly, because there's certain things you have to do before you go out to advert, and recruit selection processes and so on. And with the higher number of recruitments that we're doing across the organisation, it's a struggle balancing that alongside other operational work at the moment. But I don't think we're particularly out of sync with anywhere else. So yeah, we just need to keep an eye on it. What I wouldn't want is our numbers increasing significantly, because we've got more chance of losing people if we do.
Yep. Thanks, Joe. That's very helpful.
Thank you very much, Joe. Councillor Arnott. Paul.
Thank you, Chair, very much. Just briefly, really, to use this agenda item as a means of thanking everybody who's been involved in setting this committee up and in creating this as an absolutely significant, first fruit, so to speak. If we go back a year or two, it's very hard to understand how members would have had a grasp, really, of this kind of data, this kind of information, but lots of people were asking for it. So I'd like to, and I will bore people again if this comes to cabinet on this subject, but I'd like to particularly thank John as the portfolio holder, Mark and Henry on the Democratic side, and Joe as well for, Joe in particular, I should say, for presenting us with this. It feels like a brilliant fresh start, and thank you very much. And I look forward to the next one. I'm not raw. This doesn't qualify as a dashboard, does it? It looks, no, I'm always a bit at dashboards. This looks actually really useful. So thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks.
You're very welcome, Councillor Arnott. Councillor Lawrence. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, can I ask Joe for a bit of clarity? I was interested to see that agency workers have gone down, which presumably means that we've employed more people on a permanent contract. But then you look at the headcount and the vacancies, and that doesn't show up as being the case. Yeah. So I was just wondering where the correlation was between those figures, if there is one.
I think it's probably to do with Christmas, as part of, because these data was as of the end of December. It's the engagement of agency workers is done locally by service areas to meet their specific needs at that time. So other than the number of agency workers which we hold on the HR system, we haven't got centrally a lot more information around that. But we are, that's something my HR business partners, for example, are working with service leads to just understand that a bit more for me to be able to respond to those sorts of questions, if they come up here at committee. But I think that probably is about Christmas more than anything else. I think we'll have to see a bit of the data over a bit of a longer period to see whether we're making any great strides in terms of recruiting more permanent, employees rather than using agency workers. Yeah. And I think there'll always still be a need for agency workers for some roles. Some we've used, for example, for seasonals and things like that. So I think there'll still be a need. I don't think we'll reduce them completely.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Thank you for that, Joe. I've got Mark Williams.
Well, actually, Joe covered it right at the end, but just in terms of the point that Richard made, some of it reflected the difficulty in actually recruiting agency workers during the summer, or the spring stroke the summer, particularly on the street scene side. And that's what led to the report which Cabinet, I think it was, considered around our scales 1 to 5 and the steps that we took to address that. So some of it is the fact that we weren't actually able to recruit agency workers because we couldn't match what the agencies were asking for in terms of salaries for those workers, particularly the seasonals and street scene.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. I've got Councillor Miller. Paul.
Thanks, Chair. I understand, as the report states, that benchmarking is often very difficult to do, but it would be really interesting, I think, it was referred to earlier in the report, in an earlier report, but this report is about supporting, as it states, supporting policy decision making. And an earlier report stated the ratio between the lowest and the highest paid in the organisation is 6.6 to 1. I'd be really interested, I'm sure others would be, certainly my colleague Councillor Bonetta would be interested, who can't be here today, in the how that compares with the other authorities. And I've just asked Jo for her, through you, Chair, asked Jo for her view on how difficult that would be to get, because I would have thought that they would have that data, the other authorities. I'd be really interested personally to see how we match up, because obviously I think it will inform future thinking on, for example, whether we do become a living wage employer, something that I definitely support in principle. So that would be great. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor. It was actually, when the item was there, it was actually mentioned quite specifically in terms of where we sat in relation to other comparable employers. And I share your view that it actually, no, clearly, if you're going to use a measure, the absolute measure is of limited value when you're not comparing it with to profile yourself in regards to your competition. So
Totally.
I think we took that on board, but thank you for
cheers. Thank you.
To support it. Councillor Arnott, Paul.
Thank you, Chair, very much. Two quick points. I've realised, with apologies, in my role of grovelling praise earlier, that I left you out, Chair, of all the people to leave out. So I just want to have
I'm
you
never
in
offended, Paul. I'm used to
well,
it.
no,
At least there was no abuse. So I think I see that as a result.
I know.
No
I know people from Yorkshire often keep quiet about these things, but notes are taken. So I'd just like to correct that. Secondly, just to ask Joe, really, in a little, just to understand a bit more about the planning recruitment side. It's a sort of hypothetical, really. It is, if you are somebody qualified in planning, is it to your advantage to stay as a consultant out there in the wild, because presumably the rewards are greater, or it'd be really interesting to understand what the incentive is to come and work within an authority. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really, planning is fairly new to me with joining the district council. I know it's one of those skill shortage areas. The LJ, you've picked up on that previously, and so on. And I'm comparing it in my head to what I know around with working for the county council around social workers, for example, and exactly the same issues. And the reasons why children's social workers, for example, stay on agency rather than go into employee roles, because the pay rates are better. So I'm guessing that probably is the case with planning. It's something we can look at as part of the reward review. It's a systemic issue. It's not an organisational issue. Whether there's anything we can address through the reward review around planners to mitigate against that, we'll look at that. But it is an issue where we've got professional areas where there are skill shortages nationally, and people can get better rates of pay. Obviously, what we need to do is sell the wider package around, being an employee, around the pension and the benefits and so on. But even that, I know from a children's social work point of view, even that isn't necessarily going to attract, move people away from those agency roles. But we'll see what we can do. We'll pick it up for the reward review.
Thank you for that, Joe. Mark, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things, Paul, that you find in a lot of the professions within local government. There's a sense that after qualifying, it's good to go and work for a council because you get some solid grounding in a range of issues. And then I think as your career potential progresses, then a decision comes, doesn't it, in terms of do you look for what are potentially more exciting areas of work in the private sector, more remunerative areas of work in the private sector, as against the risk of perceived relatively secure employment in the public sector. And it fundamentally then comes down to an individual decision, really, doesn't it? But what is interesting, I think, in terms of comparing authorities is the offer that different councils can make for an interesting workload. So in the past, certainly in planning, a lot of what's been going on in the West End, if you like, in terms of the growth and the development there, has been an attraction. So for purposes of trying to recruit to planning, we have emphasised that there's a lot going on in the district, and it's not, if you like, a sleepy old rural district type thing. And that has, we've managed to attract staff in the past on the back of that, to be honest. Interestingly, though, we've also now recently lost one or two, I think, but certainly one member of staff who's gone up towards Somerset and a lot of the work that's going on in Taunton, because that seems to be more interesting in terms of the growth agenda that Taunton has, for example. So there'll always be a bit of mix and match, I guess.
Thank you for that, Mark. Councillor Loudon, John.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to respond to Councillor Arnott's question, and perhaps do so on the back of what Mark and Joe have said, and to perhaps address it more generally rather than planning, because I'm no expert on planning, as Councillor Arnott will have gathered over the years. But yes, you know, working for us, you get paid sick leave, you get paid annual leave, you get access to a good pension scheme, which is right and proper. You get the benefit of having the ability to apply for loans and mortgages on the basis that you have got reasonably secure, as Mark was saying, employment, as opposed to perhaps the short-term greater remuneration and potentially the opportunity to dally around with your tax affairs. So I think the point that Mark was making, though, about trying to make a work package attractive is always something that a good employer will look to do, whatever the job. So it's not doom and gloom, but you know, we're in a situation, aren't we, where we're almost at zero unemployment in this country. Hence, and today the government announced that it was going to make life slightly more difficult for those people on universal credit.
Thank you for that, John. Councillor Blakey. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm risking repetition here, but for emphasis, I think that one of the big benefits of working for a local authority is undoubtedly the defined benefit pension scheme at a time when investment returns are variable, disastrous at the moment. Having that security is to my mind a great thing, and we should be pushing hard on that one when we're looking to recruit, because it's worth a small fortune. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that's all the hands gone at this point. So I'd just like to personally just thank Joe for Appendix 9A. I say 9A, it's Appendix 1 to Item 9, just because I think that's very helpful, and just to mention specifically that the visual presentation is much more powerful for a short look than necessarily tabulated figures. So thank you for that, and I'm pleased we've managed to incorporate it. Again, moving things forward, I think the recommendation here is that the committee endorses the content of the report, which again, I'm happy to move from the chair. So could you please indicate favour with a green tick or against with a red cross?
And that's carried unanimously, Chair.
Thank you very much. We're doing very well this morning. I think an enormous amount of consensus, which is valuable and actually quite an important message in relation to personnel related items in itself. Next item is agenda item 10, which is the Personnel Committee Forward Plan, which is item 10, as I say. Any comments on that at this point? I've got Councillor Miller. Paul.
Thanks. Yeah, at the last ordinary meeting of the overview committee, there was a recommendation that we had a scoping form, and it was unanimously agreed that that we would send or refer the matter of a public register of senior officer interests to the personnel committee. So that was received cross-party support at that meeting, unanimously voted for, and that was October. So I just wanted to ask, Chair, whether that could be added to the forward plan. I don't know whether a vote overview is binding for you to consider this, but if it's not something the committee wishes to consider, I guess I'd return it to overview. But it is something I'm noted from the monitoring officer's comments on my scoping form that would need some consultation with trade unions if it were to go ahead. So thank you, Chair. You're on mute, Chair.
Which is an even safer way of doing something like this. Anyway, no, all I would just like to comment is my instinct is that it's not actually an appropriate matter for us to cover here. I did look at a number of other authorities who have very basic records, but really, and again, it's not something we're required to do, so I'm not minded to bring it forward. Okay. Sorry, it's all gone very quiet at my end. I've got a couple of comments, a couple of speakers. Councillor Loudon, John.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested to hear your comments there, and I would agree. I'm not sure that there is a benefit from this. I'm not sure there is a crying need for this, frankly. And I think the comments that were made by the monitoring officer at the overview committee, I think it was Councillor Miller's written submission, there were monitoring officer comments there, and I think they were quite germane to all of this. I think, frankly, this is a bit of a distraction at this point. If we are at the process, we're going through a process where we are trusting our senior officers to make decisions on our behalf because we have decided not to meet in person. And if at this juncture we're asking them and trusting them to do that on the one hand, then on the other hand we're saying, well, we're not sure we can trust you, and we therefore, and the public can't trust you, and therefore you need to make sure that you have a complete public disclosure of everything related to you. I'm not sure that those two things sit side by side, and particularly at this point, I just don't see this as being an appropriate thing. And if I was a senior officer at the moment, having seen this, and I was present at overview, and I listened and heard what was said, if I was a senior officer at this point, I'd probably be going, what the heck do these members think about us? And so I would concur with your point, Chair.
Thank you for that, John. Councillor Arnott, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to make a comment, but I'd just like to, before that, just ask Henry a question, if I may, which is, Henry, did, and forgive me, I haven't seen your note recently, but this isn't something I believe that other authorities generally do. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, thank you. Sorry, excuse me. That's right, the majority don't, and I haven't done a paper as such, but I think the comments you're referring to was my response to the proposal form, and they are on there, they're public record.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Henry, and thank you, Chair. I can understand Councillor Miller's disappointment in your reaction, Chair, and Councillor Loudon's, but I have to say, on balance, I agree with you, Chair, and with Councillor Loudon. I think, you know, we're in a small group here. If I have reason to believe that, let's say Mark, for example, is the grand wizard of some extraordinary lodge somewhere, I would have asked him by now, direct, to be quite frank. In fact, I might ask him later. But being serious about this, I think there is an element, a really important element of trust between members and officers here. I would be incredibly uncomfortable as an employee putting, you know, another hat on. Not that I've been an employee since 1992, but if I were an employee, I would question the idea of my personal interests being there on some kind of available register. Now, whether it was fully public, absolutely not. But even if it's something that only members had access to, not all members can be trusted with that kind of information, to be absolutely frank, not to make a bit of mischief from it. So I think, although I can really understand and indeed would, you know, endorse the principle of what Paul is suggesting here, I think where we are now with this council, and particularly since it isn't supported, from example, some other council, I don't think it's helpful at the moment. And I would certainly, you know, if this came through to Cabinet eventually, I would be saying the same thing there. Thanks, Chair.
Oh, Thank you very much for that. My button looks if I was unmuted, but I wasn't. My apologies for that. I'd like to, I've seen Councillor Miller's indicated you want to speak, but Councillor Lawrence hasn't spoken yet. So Councillor Lawrence, Richard, would you like to contribute, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I concur with the last two speakers. I mean, I don't really have any interest in what officers have or don't have, and provided they don't do anything that brings the council into disrepute, I don't think that we need to know all this stuff, to be honest. It doesn't appeal to me one little bit. I think that, you know, we rely on them at the moment, and in particular for their integrity, and I would like to keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Miller, you want to speak briefly again? I know we normally only speak once on particular item, but
no, thank you.
I'm happy you come back.
Short meeting.
But I think hopefully in the context of the remarkable unity of view across the rest of the piece.
Yeah, we had remarkable unity at Overview, and obviously there's remarkable unity in the other direction here. But I did want to point out two things. Number one, that whilst Henry's right, it's the majority. It's not just one or two councils having public registers. There are dozens. So that's just one point there. The second point, obviously, and it's sort of in response to Councillor Loudon's sort of what he was implying, I think, that there was somehow some malign intentions here, which there absolutely aren't from my point of view. I think from my point of view, it would be the intention, at least, was to do the opposite. Really, was to demonstrate to the public that there wasn't any concerns. I think I've mentioned in a previous meeting, there have, you know, I think in council, senior officers do have a lot of delegated authority, and quite rightly, councillors don't get the allowances to be able to commit to often a full-time role. So officers do get a lot of delegated authority. And certainly when I went for election in Exmouth, and I only speak from personal experience here, a lot of members of the public were criticising officers, which I've learned in my time as a councillor is wrong. It is absolutely wrong. As a member, I would love to be able to refer members of the public to a public register. On the other hand, I absolutely take on board the comments of this committee, and it's right that it's been referred. And I guess, you know, as it's been referred, I think this item will end. But I just wanted to clarify that there weren't any sort of malign intentions from my point of view, and certainly nothing to want to make the public distrust officers. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you for that, and I'm pleased you understand and recognise the reasoning behind the approach I've taken on this one. Councillor Loudon, again, I know it's not relevant, but you were mentioned in that, so I think it's perfectly reasonable to allow you to respond.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I just wish to pick up the point that Councillor Miller made about whether or not I was implying or inferring malign intentions on his behalf. I don't think anything I said could be interpreted in that way. And for the record, I wasn't inferring or suggesting. I have to assume that all members come forward with proposals with playing a straight bat. And I accept the point that he makes that he has no malign intentions. So for the record, Chair, I just wanted to make that perfectly clear.
Thank you very much. And just, I think as Chair, I'll come back. I'm sorry, I know Mark wants to speak, but I just want to make a quick comment if I could, Mark, first. Firstly, I think this authority is demonstrating just how, when there's strong trust between leaders, leadership, members in the body and officers, senior officers, we can actually work through very difficult circumstances of a global pandemic and still keep the lights on, still keep our business functioning effectively, and still keep everybody engaged, and arguably, in fact, engaged with the public and the outside world much more effectively than we would do normally. So, and that would not be possible without a very strong level of trust and confidence in our senior officers, which I've never had reason to doubt. So I just like to think, I think that's an important record in the context of the current climate. But Mark, if you'd like to comment, over to you.
Well, I think it's just to say thank you to the members of this committee for their comments and their support with regard to this. And just to sort of reassure you, if you like, if a report were required, it would be me writing it. But I have had a conversation with Unison about this, and they are fully supportive of the comments that the members of this committee have made. You're on mute, Chair.
No, I pressed the button twice. My apologies. Trigger trouble. Well, that actually brings us I think on a very positive note and reassuring note to the end of the meeting this morning. I'd like to thank everyone for taking part. Joe for doing all her work on the reports.
Chair, you haven't put the forward plan to us.
Oh, my apologies. God.
You obviously have got a cup of coffee waiting for you.
Well, a glass of water anyway. But thank you, Vice Chair, for the day. I knew you'd want to get involved at some point, and for once, as my internet hasn't failed, you've had your chance. Of course, I should claim it was intentional, but moving from the chair, the forward plan. All those in favour, please, green ticks. All those against, red crosses.
And that's unanimously agreed, Chair.
Thank you very much. All right, can I go back to my script now, Vice Chair? Is that all right if I carry on?
Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. A very tasteful T-shirt as well, by the way. A little bit dated, but very tasteful, very, very in keeping. This brings our meeting to an end. I'd like to thank everybody here and get a second chance to thank Jo yet again for all the work she puts into this committee. And frankly, without her, it couldn't function in the level it's starting to do. So I'm very grateful to her. And also grateful for any members of the public who've seen the show online on YouTube this morning, and hope you found it valuable. Could I just remind all those present that the supporting officer will confirm when the meeting is no longer being recorded or going live. And until then, your comments will be live to the public. Thank you, and thanks everybody.
Thank you, Chair.